Probably like the line is there before the hour.
Hasn't been here for long. I recommend it.
It was on Metropolitan. You go through Harrow, you went to some look. But I didn't see a hospital because we got two.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the briefing room here at the brand new Reform UK headquarters. It's a building we're proud of, and this will be the place from which we'll operate and from which we intend to win the next general election. If I said that a year ago, you all would have laughed. Well, people aren't laughing quite as much anymore. Welcome to week 2 of our Crime Figures campaign. Now, before I start, there's been some questioning of the crime figures that we've been talking about, in particular by Fraser Nelson, who's not in the room. But Fraser seems to think that crime is going down and that all is well with the world and there's absolutely nothing to worry about at all. Well, he's relying on the crime survey for England and Wales. This excludes crimes such as shoplifting, what they call victimless crimes such as drug possession, and even the possession of weapons. It also has no weighting whatsoever for high crime areas, and really rather depends on whether people want to fill out the survey or not. And when it comes to shoplifting, well, it's complete nonsense, obviously. Just one example, the House of Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee estimated that the true extent of shoplifting last year was 17 million incidents. So the CSEW, as far as we're concerned, is pretty much discredited as a means of measuring crime. And I think we all know that crime has risen significantly over the course of the last few years. And most of us now just don't even bother to report crime. Firstly, because we don't think the police will do anything about it. And secondly, because if we have our mobile phone stolen and we report it and claim on the insurance, the premium will double or treble. And that goes for much household crime as well. Over the course of the last week, migrant crime has been a very, very big debate around the country following the episode that took place at the Bell Hotel in Epping. And over the course of the next few weeks, we will delve more deeply into this. There is an alarming parallel between the extraordinary increase in the number of reported rapes and the wholly irresponsible immigration and asylum policies pursued by first Labour and then by Conservative governments. And even to have said that a couple of years ago would have been difficult without being shouted down. And I'd felt that we'd finally come to a place where we could honestly talk about crime, where we could honestly talk about the fact we want the right types of people from different countries coming into Britain, not the wrong types of people. We were even able last week to mention the fact that Afghan men are 22 times more likely to be convicted of rape than British-born nationals. And in the Sun national newspaper this morning, you'll see the figure they report there, that for sexual assaults in London, over the course of the last 7 years, 40% of them have been committed by non-British nationals. So I'd felt that things were genuinely opening up for a proper, rational, sane debate without being shouted down. Until the Online Safety Act came into being this weekend, which begins to look, although state suppression of genuine free speech may be upon us already. And I'm going to ask Zia Youssef, who has studied this in detail, to give us a brief. Zia.
Hello, good morning everyone. Look, Britain is descending rapidly into some kind of dystopia. This Online Safety Act, Orwellianly named, what it does absolutely nothing to protect children. What it does do is suppress freedom of speech in this country and really force social media companies to censor anti-government speech. I want to make a few points about this act. It's about a couple of hundred pages long, so one questions how many people actually read it, including the Tory MPs who voted and waved it through unanimously. The first section I want to draw your attention to is section 44, which gives the Secretary of State the ability to force Ofcom unilaterally to rewrite the rules about what speech social media platforms must censor. And that is a pretty terrifying thing for a single individual to have. In fact, it's the sort of thing that I think Xi Jinping himself would blush at the concept of. Then there's section 179, which is maybe even more insidious, which is to say it is illegal to say something which you know to be false, which causes, quote, and I quote, non-trivial psychological harm. And it's actually much worse than making that speech illegal. Forces social media companies to proactively censor that speech. The third point I want to make is look at the penalties that are being imposed on the social media companies who are subject to this act. You're talking about 10% of global revenues, and look, they know what they're doing in drafting this legislation. They are trying to create a perverse set of incentives so that if you're a management team, a chief executive or a board trying to protect your shareholder value, and most of these companies are international, so the UK is a tiny sliver of their revenue. So what are they going to do? They're going to be overzealous on their censorship. And by the way, it's not just 10% of global revenues. It goes further than that. The management teams of these social media companies are being threatened with jail time. And look, Elon is a hero in terms of freedom of speech, but I think even the mighty Elon is going to struggle to get his management teams to put their freedom at stake when it comes to censorship. So we're already seeing the results of this. It's been about 48 hours now since this kicked in. We've seen a few things. Number one, VPN providers are publishing their stats of increases in sign-ups in the UK, up thousands of percent. Evidence, by the way, that the 13, 14, 15-year-olds know far more about how the internet works than the dinosaurs that drafted this legislation and voted it through. But it also shows, if you go onto X, you will have seen there was a protest in Leeds against illegal immigration and a migrant hotel in the local area that has been actively suppressed. There are many other examples being surfacing now. Well, and again, this is X, which I would probably bet will be still the strongest in terms of maintaining free speech. But one can hardly blame these companies when this is what the legislation states. And then within that same 48-hour period, we've heard that the government, number 10, has created, and I quote, an elite police force in response to the migrant situation. Now, you might think that was because of the risk of so much anger around crimes being committed by illegal migrants, by people being deposited into communities from alien cultures with no say for local people, and looking to ensure that those illegal migrants do not commit crimes. Of course, you'd be wrong. It is the opposite. This elite police force has been set up in order to, quote, monitor anti-migrant sentiment. So I use the word dystopia advisedly. Inevitably, if you look through history, any student of history will know that the way countries slip into this sort of authoritarian regime is through legislation that cloaks tyranny inside the warm fuzz of safety and security, and hope nobody reads the small print. Well, we have read the small print. We at Reform we think this is the greatest assault on freedom of speech in our lifetimes, and I can announce today that as Prime Minister, Nigel Farage and a Reform government will repeal the Online Safety Act. Yes, we agree children need to be protected. This does not protect children. I want to stress this. I actually think people who actually understand tech, and I want to stress the people who drafted this and voted it through do not understand it, can understand that sending all of these kids onto VPNs is a far worse situation and sends them much closer to the dark web where real dangers lie. So it actually makes children less safe on the internet, while, of course, and perhaps this was the intention all along, makes freedom of speech for British people under mortal threat. And the final thing I want to say is we should not forget who birthed this bill, which is now an act, who voted and nodded it through without any opposition, other than in some cases, like Mr. Philp, arguing it didn't go far enough. So the people who did this were the Tories, including, by the way, the ones who now present themselves as against all of these horrors, people like Suella Braverman, people like Robert Jenrick, who in my view represent the most insidious form of politician, people who tell us all of the things we want to hear, but when they had power in their hands and could do something about it, they sold us out when it counts. So Reform believes in freedom of speech. I don't think there is a political figure in our lifetimes who has a longer track record of decades, other than Nigel, who has spoken out about this, and we will repeal this act as one of the first things a reform government does. Thank you very much.
Zia, thank you very much. And I think so far, okay, it may only have been a couple of days, but thus far there has been far too little debate in mainstream media about this issue. Clearly, what is happening, and happened very, very quickly. Millions of people have noticed that what they're getting on their feeds is different to what it was just this time last week. Well, we're now going to move on, not to talk about elite police units that crack down on comments on the internet. Now, we're now going to talk about real policing and about a real policeman, somebody with a very, very distinguished career. Before I introduce Colin Sutton to you, here's a short video just to remind people of his history and his background.
Crime is going unchecked all over the place, all over the country. I'm Colin Sutton. I was a police officer for 30 years. And I was fortunate enough to lead a marvellous team when we were investigating some of the nastiest and most publicised murders, I suppose, of the first part of this century. We convicted the serial killer Levi Belfield, the serial rapist and night stalker Delroy Grant. I get known as a detective. I'd rather be known as a leader. My number one thing really was to look after the team. Leaders now tend to think an awful lot about themselves and their own careers rather than their team and the community. And I think we need to go back to that if we're going to have policing succeed and policing to return to something that is accepted and welcomed by the community. Two-tier policing, two-tier criminal justice system is one that's been bandied about a lot. I don't think it's an unfair thing to say. I think the perceptions are real. You've only got to look through the news, through social media, at the disparity between sentences for different crimes or for people from different communities or from different ideologies. And I start asking myself, so how can it be? How do we end up in this situation where these disparities are there? But they're real. First reason for that is just simply numbers. Officers in London particularly are going from blue light call to blue light call to blue light call, and they haven't got time to speak to people. They haven't got time to find out about their community. There's too much work to do, that things are not happening in the criminal justice system quickly enough, decisively enough. 14 years of the Tories caused it. It happened on their watch. We made a difference when I was in the police service. There's no doubt about that. And I thought, well, maybe I've got an opportunity now to make a difference with another team. And so that team, I think, is Reform. I believe in it. The greatest asset Reform has in some ways is our leader, because he is a communicator. We need to be able to replicate that locally so people will follow us. It's about teamwork and it's about one voice taking other people with us. I think the best chance of making sure we turn this round and we make this change is if we have a Reform UK government. Britain is lawless. Britain needs reform.
So Colin Sutton is about to embark on his second big career, and I'm very pleased to say he's also announced that he intends not just to stand for us at the next general election, but to head up a law and order and policing task force so that we can go into the next general election ready on day one to start doing the right things, to reverse lawlessness and take back control of the streets. So we really are, as a party, absolutely delighted to welcome Colin Sutton on board. Colin. Welcome.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming, I suppose. just have to say, an elite team looking at tweets would not be my experience of the police service, but we'll gloss over that one for the moment, I think. You might be asking why I'm here, why reform, why now, why do this, why not get my handicap below 11? I don't know. I do know, actually. It's because for 14 years we saw the Conservatives wreck our country and wreck, for me, the most important institution in that country, which is our police service. The police service is part of what I see as the 3 pillars of a decent life. You need to be healthy, you need to have an income, and you need to be secure in your home and on the streets as you're living that life. And if we fail on any one of those 3, then people cannot think things are getting better. The decline in public service is just amazing. So many people last July said, well, it can't get any worse. Actually, privately, I think it could. I thought it could, but many thought it couldn't. Well, what's happened? It's not only got worse. I find every single day I'm thinking to myself, is Rishi Sunak still holding Keir Starmer's beer? The obvious situation to address that, it started in 2010. It started with the decline, with austerity, with the withdrawal of resources, which means now that our police services have sold the family silver entirely across the estate. And they're not going to get any more money or more resources from this government, are they? The only place where resources from this government will go into policing are the Chagos Islands. It's not going to happen. We can find savings. There are savings to be made. Do you know that police forces in this country spend anywhere between 10 and £70 million a year on DEI initiatives? And what I want us to do is to ask the people out there who are people who are police and who want these people to be working for them, whether or not they see that as the priority. Because if you need some help, if you need police officers, if you need help quickly, do you actually care who comes through the door? You want 2 trained, competent officers to solve your emergency there and then, and you're not going to ask them how they voted or what their heritage is. It doesn't make any difference. Reform has said that they want to increase the number of officers by 30,000 within the next Parliament. I will be pushing for them to add to that the commitment, or at least the ambition, to open at least 300 front counter police buildings. Because as far as I am concerned, we have lost too many. We've lost nearly 700 public access police buildings across this country since 2010. The Metropolitan Police in London is going soon to go down to having only 18 points of public access in the whole of London. When I was working, that was well over 100. And it's no good saying that internet access and online access is a replacement for it, for 2 reasons. One is that the aged, the infirm and the generally vulnerable may well find difficulties in using the internet or indeed getting access to it. But secondly, and what's more important, is it's a lot harder to turn somebody down if they're face to face with you pleading for help, than it is if you've got an email in a stack. We need to re-engage. We need to re-engage. We need to be more visible. Because at the moment we've got a response team that you can't guarantee turns up because there are too few of them, and those that are there are wasting their time driving long distances because there are no police stations anymore, and then even longer distances because there's no custody suites to take the prisoners to if they do arrest somebody, and then driving back again. You can lose 5 hours out of an 8-hour tour of duty just driving about to your patrol area, driving to a custody area and back. How is that productive? Investigations. All crimes that are reported used to be looked at. They weren't all investigated with vigour. You have to be realistic about this. There are too many of them. But every single one is looked at by somebody who's experienced, somebody knows what they're looking at, and they make a decision as to whether or not the investigation carries on. Nowadays, too many crimes are just given a reference number for the insurance company and forgotten about. That can't happen. In terms of public order, it's very difficult. You need to show that public order is being policed fairly, that it's being policed impartially. The recent judgment in the court about Avon and Somerset, about Northumbria, has helped us to that degree, I think, because it takes away the idea that police officers are going to get involved in any kind of public display of partiality to one cause or another. That's a good step forwards. But in terms of how we police public order, I, in this task force, want to get people who know. I did public order policing up until about 30 years ago, I suppose, for about the first 10 years of my career, and I know a bit about it, but I want people who know more about it. And they might be able to explain to us why it is that some bodies, some organisations, are perhaps more clever in the way that they mount their protests compared to others, and that's why you get the different levels of policing. I don't know. There may be reasons for it. We need to look at that. But if we're going to rebuild trust in the police service, we need to re-engage with the community. We need to re-engage with the real community, not with community leaders, so-called. How do you become a community leader? Who advertises it? Where's the job description? We need to do the things that matter to real people. I can't believe, I've known thousands of police officers over my life, past and present, and I can't believe that any one of those would tell me that he or she joined up, signed on the dotted line to serve king and country, or queen and country in the past, because they wanted to police social media. I used to go home as a young police officer to my family and say, brilliant job last night, mean streets of Tottenham, yes, we arrested a burglar. That's what you join for. Do these days go home and say, found a fantastic offensive tweet today? And I'm sure the answer to that is no. I'm sure that's not what they want to be doing. So then the question is, why is it that they're doing it, that they're doing what they're doing? And I'll tell you what it is, what I think it is. I think it is the fact that our leadership is caring more about itself and its own career than it is about their team, important to me, and the community, important to everybody. And so, like most organisations, the police service is no different. It has been captured by a liberal ideology, and people are too scared of bucking against that ideology. And so when the decision comes up to make, do we go this way, do we go that way, or that way is going to give me a massive black mark because it doesn't fit in with the trend, I'm not going to get promoted, let's do that instead. Yeah, but the public won't like that. Doesn't matter. They're not the ones that promote me, are they? The dilemma that the officers often have is what is the least worst decision for me. It should be what is the best decision for the community. I think we need to refocus what police are doing onto homes and streets and not posts and tweets. That's the most important thing. That's the most important thing for the people out there who want their... But you ought to be able to walk out of here with a decent watch on. I left mine at home today. You ought to be able to go out there and call an Uber on your iPhone. But I wouldn't do it once I got out the door in London these days. There's a phone stolen every 60 seconds in London. How can that be right? How can that be right? How can we let that happen? So what I want to do is to get this task force together. I've had some people, do you know, already volunteer to me that they want to assist me. Good people, people who know things. Policy, prevention, processes. Police officers who are watching or listening to this will smile when I say the 3 Ps because that means something else in policing. I won't go into that here. Okay, but policy, prevention and the processes is what we will look at, and we will come up with a plan that takes us back, takes back control, makes Britain not the lawless place it's becoming. Thank you very much.
Colin, thank you very much indeed. Now, we will move to questions, of which there are quite a few. I think you can direct the questions to me. Do I have a press list, Ed? I do. I've got it. You can direct the questions to anybody here. There's a handheld mic at the side. Let us begin with Alex Forsyth, BBC.
Hi, thank you so much. You say you want to repeal the Online Safety Act. What, if anything, would you replace it with? Or do your concerns about free speech outweigh any concerns about children accessing suicide material, self-harm content, or pornography? And Donald Trump's in the UK today. That issue of steel tariffs still unresolved. Do you think that Donald Trump's tariffs have been good for British business?
Point one, as Zia made perfectly clear, of course we want to find a way of protecting young people from not getting hold of harmful or dangerous content. But if a result of what we've seen over the weekend is driving people off towards VPNs, to potentially towards the dark web, we might find young people accessing even more dangerous content than they were before this legislation came in. So, would we do our best to find a way of making this work? Yes, but frankly, Zia is far more tech savvy than I am, so I'm going to take his word for it. His belief is that those that drafted this act genuinely didn't understand how the tech world works and have produced something with the very best of intentions, but the result of which, frankly, does lead us towards a very dystopian place. Trump and tariffs, look, we're better off than being in the European Union, I think is the answer, and it's ironic, isn't it, that Keir Starmer says, look, we're doing better than Brussels, that Keir Starmer says, look at this great deal we've got with India, and, the most anti-Brexit, pro-second referendum Prime Minister, ironically, is actually benefiting in some ways from Brexit, mind you. Given everything else that's going on with his career at the moment, I guess he does need the odd good turn. Adam Cherry, GB News.
Thank you. Prime Minister's meeting the President today. Are you planning to meet President Trump whilst he's here? Are you still speaking to him, or have relations cooled with the President?
No, when he was up in Turnberry last May, I was there for GB News actually, but I was there and I stayed there and I was obviously back for the campaign in November, and I was in Mar-a-Lago on the 5th and 6th. I'm in a slightly awkward position now, or he's in a slightly awkward position with me. I can't just bowl up on a friendly trip for diplomatic reasons, whilst he's there with the Prime Minister negotiating steel tariffs and much else. It just doesn't work. Am I on good terms? I had dinner with Donald Trump Jr. the other week. I'm in good terms. I'm on good terms with the administration. My relationship with Trump has always been one of friendship, but right at the moment, diplomatically, it doesn't really work. Justine from ITV.
So a big part of your policing plan will require more resources for forces. How much will this cost, and where will the additional funding come from? And just secondly, on the online safety bill, if you get rid of this legislation, are you confident that social media platforms can police this content themselves?
Okay. Well, the answer to that, Zia, surely is that would just take us back to last Friday, wouldn't it? Correct. He says I'm right. So as far as that's concerned, sorry, your first question?
It's just on additional...
Oh, right, okay, no. We laid this out last week. Our estimate of 30,000 police, our estimate of increased prison places, our estimate of reopening police stations, and in particular having more custody areas, and Colin made the point, you can do an 8-hour shift and waste 5 hours of it driving to a nearby custody suite and back, and I'm seeing that in Clacton myself as being an issue. We've estimated the cost for that at 17.4 billion, and before you leave, we will give you a sheet that gives us all of our costings. How are we going to pay for it? Well, we're going to stop monstrosities like HS2. We're going to stop tens of billions a year being wasted on climate change. And as you know, we have ongoing conversations with the Bank of England, who appear to be quite close to locking in a loss of up to £100 billion. And it's a very odd debate we have where we argue about £1.5 billion for, winter fuel allowances, and yet here we are happy. Oh, I almost forgot, didn't I? I almost forgot Sizewell. The cost of that's doubled from 20 billion to 40 billion. No proper debate about the tens of billions we waste. Huge arguments over £1 billion here and £1 billion there. Serena from Sky.
Thanks. This is also about cost, to be honest. You said £17 billion you're going to get from scrapping HS2 net zero. You're promising you'll halve crime rates in 5 years. It seems like a bargain price for that price tag. The party's economic programme also claims to deliver tax reductions, spending cuts, but also improved public services. This sounds a bit sort of Liz Truss economics, doesn't it? A bit too good to be true.
No, because what Liz Truss didn't do was put any spending cuts into that budget. And that was what did for the Truss and Kwarteng budget. They talked about what they would cut in terms of taxes to increase incentives, something that we all fully understand. What they didn't talk about were big cuts to public spending. And it's funny, but the chap in Argentina has cut the public sector workforce by 15%, and we're now witnessing Argentina really for the first time in 100 years, after just decline, devaluation, default, and we're now witnessing, I think, the beginnings of an economic miracle, which is happening in Argentina. It is incumbent upon us, between now and the next election, to explain to you and everybody else how we will reduce the size of the state sector and get more efficiency into our public services. And I accept I haven't got the full answers on that right now, but it is a direction of travel.
I just got one on Trump as well.
Yes.
Donald Trump is meeting Keir Starmer today. He's been the first to get a trade deal. Trump has said he likes the Prime Minister. Do you think he's doing a good deal?
I think we're very lucky. We have an American president who is incredibly pro-British, with a deep emotional attachment to Scotland in particular, and of course an adoration of our late Queen. So I think Keir Starmer's very lucky. I think very, very lucky. He's always nice about Keir. He does say he's a bit more liberal than me, which is a slight understatement. But I think Starmer's very, very fortunate to have this American president. And he's right about the windmills. Right, next one. Christopher from PA, please.
Thanks. You talked about, at the start, letting the right sort of people into the country.
Yeah.
Donald Trump's been convicted of a number of offences and found liable in court for sexual assault. Is he the right sort of person to be letting into the country?
I think that was a civil case, not a criminal case. Am I right or am I wrong? Thank you. I'm talking about huge numbers of undocumented young males who throw their iPhones and their passports into the English Channel as they reach the 12-mile line. I can send you the video if you like. I've actually videoed it. Coming in from goodness knows where, but predominantly coming in from Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Eritrea, coming in from countries in which women aren't even second-class citizens. And we will be talking over the next couple of weeks about the direct link between people like that, from those backgrounds, and the rise in sexual violence against women and girls in this country. And I think that's why, just in the space of a week, Mums for Reform as a concept has really, really taken off. Claire from the Daily Mail.
Thank you. You say you want to repeal the Online Safety Act, but how would you protect children like Molly Russell and stop that happening again? And also, do you accept that at some point you'll have to put up taxes to pay for some of your proposals on crime?
Look, I think Zia made it perfectly clear, and I hope that I've repeated it as clearly since. That of course we want something to be done to protect children and young children, yes. But when it comes to legislation, the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. And if the result of an attempt by the last government to stop cases like Molly Russell from happening finishes up with genuine open debate and free speech, able to be erased at the stroke of a pen from one minister without any checks from Ofcom or from anybody else, and then we find ourselves in a worse place. Can I stand here and say that we have a perfect answer for you right now? No. Can I say that as a party we have more access to some of the best tech brains, not just in the country, but in the world? That I can say to you. And can I say we'd make a much better job of it than has been done? I think that's pretty clear already. Look, as far as taxes are concerned, we have a major problem in this country. People are fleeing the country. There is an exodus going on. And it isn't just the super rich. It isn't just the non-doms. Increasingly alarming are those in their late 20s through to their early 40s, the kinds of people who want to set up businesses, the kinds of people who are prepared to take risk, the kinds of people who do genuinely, when they get it right, create wealth and create jobs, and when they get it wrong, they lose all their own money, and they are fleeing, and they're being encouraged. Lisbon, for many, many years, they're being encouraged by Milan, they're being encouraged by Athens, they're tempted by America, they're tempted by Australia. So, you have to get the tax ratios right. And one thing I will say is that economic growth depends on something called optimism, a buzz, a feeling. And that is something that Starmer and Reeves have absolutely killed. I think the famous things can only get worse speech, the sort of hangdog expression on a good day, tears on a bad day, don't send out a positive energy and a positive buzz. And we are going to be, I've said it before and I'll say it again, we are the party of people who have alarm clocks. We're the party of people who get up in the morning and go to work, who take a pride in what they do. And I think we did a complete change of culture, especially around setting up your own businesses, especially about taking risk than we've had before, or up until now. Azir, please.
Can I just add a little bit of meat to the bone to your question again on the Online Safety Act? The reason why we're saying it needs to be repealed is because the vast majority of it is totally A, unfit for purpose, and B, overreach that is going to impede British people's freedom of speech. And so, yes, of course, there needs to be a serious concerted effort to protect young people in this country. The legislation under Nigel would be drafted by people who, again, understand how the internet actually works. It is extraordinarily difficult as a technical problem to censor the internet. And I point you to the numbers that are already out in the last 24 hours from VPN companies, crowing from the hills about sign-up rates in the thousands and thousands of %. And what then happens is people determined to look for that content, whether it's suicide and harm stuff, whether it's depraved pornography, determined people will find it. And then the content that is then adjacent to that, because they've gone into the depths of the dark web, I promise you, is the most horrendous content any parent could ever hope, could ever... It is parents' worst nightmares, right? So what this bill has done, as I say, is take kids into a direction where that stuff is more likely, while simultaneously I still don't hear any justification for Section 44, which gives Secretary of State the ability to order Ofcom to redraft the rules without proper parliamentary oversight and scrutiny, nor Section 179 that creates this threshold of non-trivial psychological harm, which is so open to interpretation. Many experts in the technology world and the legal world voiced their concern about this. It all fell on deaf ears. So that's our response to that. Of course, Nigel cares about the safety of young kids. That's partly why we think this has to be repealed. But so much of the bill and the act now is massive overreach and plunges this country, as I said, into a borderline dystopian state.
Yeah, of course, Trump's here at the moment, as a couple of you have mentioned, and J.D. Vance will be here in a few days' time. It'll be very interesting to see what his take on this legislation is. Michael from The Express.
Nigel, thank you very much. With protests breaking out across the country, why do you think it will take up to 4 years for the government to close asylum hotels? And to restore confidence for the public, what crimes have to fall?
As far as the protests are concerned, yeah, I mean, goodness knows what may happen over the course of the summer. We would encourage people to protest quietly and sensibly. We were pretty appalled by the behaviour of Essex Police last week. I mean, literally escorting masked masked, open defenders of Antifa, an organisation that uses violence, and there was the police, for some reason, escorting them to confront face-to-face concerned mothers in the area of Epping. Just a terrible policing tactic. Is it any surprise that violence broke out? And after they'd had their little protest, they put them in police vans and bussed them back to the station, just in case their legs were tired, I suppose, or something like that. So I have to say that I quite, really question seriously the behaviour of the acting chief constable in Essex. I'm amazed that he's not really been held to account over it. The crimes that really need to fall, well, I think it is about two things, really. One, feeling confident that you can go down to the shops and not have your phone nicked. And two, most important of all, the feeling that your teenage kids, can go out and have fun as teenage kids ought to, without the terrible fear that something awful is going to happen to them, especially if they're female. And they are, I think, the two markers of what success might look like at the end of 5 years. Thank you. Noah from The Sun.
Thank you, Nigel. Would you or would reform outlaw Sharia courts if you got into government? And quickly, if I may, I noticed Anne Coulter is here in the audience. Does she have a role in reform, or why is she here today? Thank you.
Okay, very, very good. I thought Sharia courts were... I didn't think Sharia courts were permitted under the law as it stands at the moment. All of which makes it all the more remarkable that the British government is applying online on Find a Job for a Sharia law coordinator. This is the extent of the total surrender of the values that have built this country, the Judeo-Christian culture that underpins this country. And we still have an established Church of England. Haven't got an archbishop yet, but that's a separate question. That's been going on for some time. And we've always been tolerant, haven't we? We've always been tolerant of Jewish communities coming to settle in this country, all sorts of faiths coming to settle in this country. But it seems when it comes to those of the Islamic faith that want to push and push and push, and in some cases even have the ambition to overtake the existing culture, we're prepared to open doors and to allow them to do whatever they want to do. And Anne is here as an observer today. Does she have a formal role with the party? No. Is she somebody who, over the course of many years, has written and said many interesting things? And sadly with Anne, she's made some predictions of her concerns that have come true. I'm very pleased to see her with us today. Aubrey from The Times.
Hello, Nigel. You quoted figures at the top of the press conference about some crimes being committed disproportionately by migrants, and you spoke just now in the Q&A about huge numbers of undocumented young men arriving by small boats. You've said in the past that I think mass deportations are impractical, but what steps would you take to speed up deportations of those people here illegally? And if I can, a question to Zia as well. What discoveries have you made running Doge about how councils handle tackling crime? Is there anything that your unit is encountering about how to address the issue better, given you're now in control of 10 councils and 2 mayoralties?
Obviously, all the while we stay part of the ECHR, and British judges can rely upon that, deporting almost anybody is incredibly difficult unless they're willing to go. And the government's boasting about deportations, but these are frankly visa overstayers, not people that have come across the channel by boat. We'll talk more about deportations over the course of the next 5 weeks. This, as I said last week, is a 6-week rolling campaign. We'll talk a lot more about that over the course of the next few weeks. Zia, Doge.
I'm glad you asked that, actually. So that there's a conversation that immediately springs to mind at a county hall. I won't say which one because I don't want to betray the confidence of the people in that room. But there were some of our elected councillors and some of the senior civil servants in that room. And what was really interesting was there was a migrant hotel that was causing clearly a major issue in that local area, where there was now needing to be a police presence at local bus stops because parents were so worried about their, particularly their young daughters, waiting for the bus alone as a direct consequence of residents at this hotel. And so I said, okay, well, you know, one of the things we've said we're going to do is look into this, particularly why complaints, when they are made, don't seem to be getting to the right places in terms of councils. And the civil servants in that room, the senior civil servants, said, no, we're unaware of this. And these are good people, and they were telling the truth. And what we worked out through about 10 minutes of going around in circles was those complaints were going into the police. And therefore, the people in the planning teams were totally unaware of it. Unless you actually sat on that police committee, you would have been totally unaware of these really extreme complaints that were being made routinely. And then, as Nigel pointed out at the beginning of this press conference, people give up. That's what happens. Yeah. People realise that this isn't having any effect. And so the diagnosis here, once again, is far too much bureaucracy. Nobody really, even if they have good intentions, really considering what it's like to be a local resident and have these people deposited in your area with no say for you, and they don't have the financial means to send them a taxi. So they're living in fear. So that was a really interesting conversation. And by the way, this sort of thing happens writ large across the councils, and it's exactly the sort of thing that needs really serious reform, and what Nigel and the Reform government will focus on doing.
Thank you, and much more to come from Doge. Charles, Daily Telegraph.
Thanks for the press conference, Nigel. What would you do with the 30,000 plus asylum seekers who are currently in hotels, given the housing crisis that we're facing, plus the fact that there's another 50,000 that are still in the asylum backlog, not yet claimed? What would you do as a party to deal with that?
Oh, there's no housing crisis. The Prime Minister said so last week. There's no trouble at all. Plenty of social housing, despite the fact there are 1.3 million Brits currently on the social housing list. And I think in some of the boroughs, the potential waiting time is decades. Not years, but decades. And I thought it was very, very instructive that that was the last public appearance in the Houses of Parliament that the Prime Minister gave. And I have to say, I thought, looking at him, he didn't look, although he was completely all together. Pressure, I guess, is a thing. Look, my view is I don't think any of the young men that cross the English Channel should be free to walk our streets. I think the risk, not just the risk of getting involved in the illegal economy, not just the risk to girls and older women, I think the terrorism risk, which of course has been writ all too large over the course of the last couple of months with arrests being made, as we know. I don't believe that anybody that crosses via small boat should be able to be put in a 4-star hotel, put into a house of multiple occupancy and free to roam the streets. And I go further than that. I don't think that anybody that crosses via that route should ever be eligible to get refugee status, should ever be eligible for social housing. We are an incredibly generous country. We have given refugee status to 500,000 people since 2016. I don't think we dare do much more than we already have. We're getting to the point where, frankly, the social contract between the governors and the governed is on the edge of breaking down, which is the last thing any of us want to see. And, you know, what I've just said to you may sound a bit out there, but it's pretty much exactly what Tony Abbott did in Australia. They tried offshore processing, they tried everything. In the end, they passed a law that said nobody that comes via this route will ever be free, ever able to claim refugee status. They towed the boats back to Indonesia, and of course the UN and the EU and the British Foreign Office all threw their arms up in absolute horror, and within 2 weeks the boats stopped coming, and that was in 2012, and not a single boat has come since. That is the route we have to go. Right, we're rattling through. David from the Financial Times.
Hello. Elon Musk has come up today. I believe Zia referred to him as a hero of free speech. Is this plan to repeal the law looking at rebuilding bridges with Elon Musk at this time?
Good question. Look, you know, Musk and I had a disagreement. People have disagreements. I've been on perfectly civil terms with him ever since. You know, but I'll tell you something that might surprise you. We don't stand up here to say things that we think will curry favour with donors or anybody else. We stand up here and say things because we absolutely believe in our hearts that these are the right things to do for this country. These are the right things to do for the future of our children and grandchildren. And very often I will say things that are not populist at all. In fact, very often I've championed causes that were very much minority causes. So no, we are not saying this to curry favour with Elon Musk, despite my public disagreements with him, despite the fact I wouldn't do what he asked me to do. We still believe he is a hero when it comes to free speech. And I don't know, maybe the fact that I wouldn't do what he asked me to do reinforces the first point that I've made to you. We don't do this for short-term cheap gain. We do this because we genuinely believe in what we're doing. And I think Colin, his view is very much the same as Zia's, as mine, that unless we very rapidly turn this country around, if we allow it to continue with the uniparty running it, and frankly, you'll look here in 10 years' time and you'll see a country that's slipping off the edge towards third world status. That is how much trouble we are in. Right, let's go to Kitty from the iPaper.
Thank you. The IMF warned last week that retrogrades will have to put up taxes or scrap the triple lock. I wonder whether you could let us know whether you think the triple lock is now inevitably for the chop and whether you'll commit to it at the next election. And secondly, do you think now is the right time to recognise Palestinian statehood?
No, I don't. I don't believe in rewarding Hamas. I think we've all forgotten what October the 7th was about, haven't we? We've completely forgotten what October the 7th was about, and about the stated aim of Hamas that they would do it again and again and again until they have eradicated not just the state of Israel, but every Israeli living within it. Theirs is an intended genocide. And whilst at some point in time, wouldn't it be great to have a two-state solution? How can anyone not think that's the case? Now I think it's completely the wrong time to do that, but I can see the pressure that is mounting on the Prime Minister. He said that he won't do it, he won't recognise the Palestinian state, which given his track record over the last 6 months means he almost certainly will. And no doubt pressure from Mr Corbyn and Zara Sultana and others will push him in that direction. And the Prime Minister actually does face, he now faces, this Labour Party now faces a massive challenge on the left of that I have absolutely no doubt at all, as the old two-party system just literally falls to pieces. Yeah, whether it's the IMF or the OBR, it's difficult to know really whether the British Chancellor makes their own decisions anymore or not. As far as the triple lock is concerned, I've been asked that question before. I didn't answer it before. I won't answer it now. I won't absolutely commit to us keeping it. It will all depend what as a country we can afford. Okay. Right, we've got 4 more. We have got Rachel from the New Statesman.
Thank you. You've talked a lot today about the need to tackle violence against women and girls. You've also talked about scrapping all DEI roles in the police force. One of the things that DEI initiatives in the police forces are intended to do is tackle the culture of misogyny that has led to some pretty extreme scandals, names like Wayne Couzens, David Carrick, etc. And we've got a growing trend of women saying they do not trust the police and wouldn't report crimes of sexual violence because of that culture and the way that individuals have behaved. So I'm interested in whether you think that work should stop if you're scrapping all DEI, and I'd be particularly interested in hearing from Colin about that too, given his experience in the Met.
There's no way that the work that's going on to prevent misogyny and violence against women and girls will stop or should stop. And, you know, that's just patently obvious. Wayne Couzens, David Carrick came almost indirectly, not from necessarily a culture in the police force where they worked. They came from, they had their bases in Theresa May, austerity, and the cuts. Because, let me tell you, people like David Carrick and Wayne Couzens, if they'd have joined the police before 2010, would have spent 16 or more weeks in a residential training school under watchful eye of experienced officers. And I can tell you from back in the early 80s, when I was doing that, The wrong uns were found out and slung out during that process. They never got anywhere near members of the public. Because we no longer have training schools, because most forces no longer have the facility to train and to monitor recruits for that 24/7 period, for that long period of weeks, the vetting has slipped down. It slipped down through COVID as well. There were difficulties around there. There were some people who joined the force between the COVID dates who actually never saw another human being before they were enlisted as police officers. It's pointless, it's fatuous to say that anybody in the police service doesn't want violence against women and girls and misogyny to be tackled. Too many of us spent too much of our lives trying to prevent it and trying to tackle that as I did. But the fact is that there is no evidence whatsoever to say that officers from this minority group or with this background or whatever do a better job in policing either their own communities or other communities. And the whole thing, the way that the police service, the way that public service, and indeed the way that political parties, in my view, should operate, is that they operate as a meritocracy. It's what you are, who you are, and how good you are at it, not what's your identity.
Colin, thank you for that. And already I can see that your knowledge of this is going to be enormously helpful to us. Anja from Channel 4. Anya, I'm sorry, I apologise.
No problem. Could you tell us, could you tell us what, if any, collaboration you're having with Donald Trump's campaign from America? It's been pointed out already that there are a few people in the audience who were involved in that.
Officially none whatsoever, unofficially none whatsoever, but do our countries have shared interests? Are there many of the things that the Republicans are fighting for in America that we have commonality with? Yes. And perhaps one of them is the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who is worried about free speech in the Western world, who, as I mentioned, will be here in a couple of weeks' time. And I think everything that Zia has analysed on the Online Safety Act will be of great interest to him. Two more to go. Archie from The Independent.
Thank you. You said you wouldn't recognise or support the recognition of a Palestinian state, but if you were meeting Donald Trump when he was in the UK, him and Keir Starmer will presumably be talking about the situation in Gaza. What would your message to him be? What would you be calling on him to do about the situation in Gaza at the moment?
I think you've got to say to Netanyahu, stop losing friends the way you are. We are aware that there is a huge amount of Hamas propaganda. There's a huge amount of hospitals and schools being used by Hamas, the use of human shields. But just sometimes it does appear that Netanyahu is very, very good at losing friends. And perhaps he could approach things somewhat differently. Lastly, Stephen Castle, New York Times.
Thank you. Just on the Trump visit, hello, over here.
Yeah, hi.
Did you actually request a meeting, and if so, was it declined? And the President has actually been very complimentary about Keir Starmer. He keeps on saying he's a very good job, which, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't seem to be your position. Doesn't that indicate that perhaps your influence in the White House, whatever you say, has declined somewhat now?
I haven't tried to use any influence in the White House. I am now the leader of the opposition in Britain. Kemi thinks she is, but it's just not true. And as leader of the opposition, it puts me in a damned awkward position when there are so many negotiations going on. All right? I mean, you have your fun at the New York Times, that's fine. But that is the position. And I'm sure that when the Prime Minister says he likes Keir Starmer, he absolutely means it. I can see that they are bud and buzzes in so many ways. Big personalities, tremendous sense of humour, real-world experience. I fully understand why they are the absolute best of friends. Thank you, everybody.
I was just down the barrel here.
Yeah, either side. Yeah, fine. Yeah.